this episode of Newt's World, we're going to discuss the results of Super Tuesday, Nikki Haley dropping out of the race, and what's next in the 2024 election. We'll also discuss some of the key congressional races around the country. I'm really pleased to welcome back my good friend and my guest, Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary in the Trump administration and current host of the Sean Spicer Show, a terrific podcast. Sean, welcome and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
Always a pleasure, Mr. Speaker. Thanks for having me.
You know, I want to start, if I could, back before you became press secretary and became nationally known. What was your background leading up to going to the White House?
The quick version is I went off to college. I grew up at best working class. I went off to college as a Japanese language major because I was told that that's how I could make money. This is in the late 80s. The long and short of it is I was very bad at Japanese and I had no desire to pursue it. There was no passion in it. I took a government course and had this intellectual awakening and began getting involved. I interned in the Connecticut state legislature. I interned on some campaigns in Connecticut. And ultimately, as you were making the case for a Republican majority for the first time in decades and going around doing the Contract with America, I had graduated from college, got my first paid job, $1,000 a month in Connecticut's 2nd District, a guy named Ed Munster running against a multi-term incumbent, Sam Gagenson. And that began what I tell people affectionately, I became like a minor league ball player. I went from campaign to campaign, trying to get the next level up job, go from making $1,000 a month to like $1,200 a month. I worked in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Florida, wherever I could get the next race, New Jersey. I kind of floated back and forth between Capitol Hill during even years and on the campaign trail in odd years, and ended up doing a race in Florida's 22nd District, Clay Shaw's race in the year 2000, which was a very, very close race. Clay had been a long-term incumbent. He had a tight race for the first time ever. We pulled the race out. That I went to the NRCC, the National Republican Congressional Committee, as you know, and then kind of made my way into House leadership. I went to work for the House Republican Conference under Deborah Price, and then went to the Bush White House as the assistant U.S. trade rep for public affairs. So basically the trade spokesman. I got mobilized in the Navy, spent about 20 months on active duty. And then when I got off, Ed Gillespie connected me with Reince Priebus, who had just been elected chairman of the RNC, and said, Sean, I know you've always wanted to work at the RNC. Reince just got elected. And I hit it off with Reince. I ended up spending 3 cycles, which is 6 years at the RNC as communications director and then chief strategist for the party. And that kind of got me to Donald Trump world, because when Trump became the nominee, he didn't have the usual campaign apparatus that a presidential campaign had. And so I began performing a lot of the functions that would normally get done through the campaign. I traveled back and forth to New York. I flew with them and developed a relationship with them. I would love to say that I had 50 people lined up to be press secretary and I beat them all out. But the reality is, if we're being honest, that when Trump won, if you looked around the room at the number of people that had A, experience, B, had worked with him and had a relationship with him, there wasn't a heck of a lot of people that would have amounted to. And so we started having conversations about what my place and my role would be. And, you know, I'm not dummy. He said, you know, what would you want to do? And I said, well, how about press secretary? He's like, okay. And so that was kind of the interview.
I just did a column on Trump's triumph in terms of Super Tuesday. And I deliberately in the column spent most of the time trying to describe how he actually operates. Because if you think about it, and you lived through it, this is a stunningly intense, very, very smart guy who imposes his will 24 hours a day. It's astonishing. And I think in that sense, your point's exactly right. It wasn't the Trump campaign that won in 2016. It was Trump.
Yeah, I think we provided resources and tools for him, but it wasn't like massive focus groups. I had been at the RNC for 6 years and 2 cycles. We weren't feeding up research to him saying, say this, don't say that, say which, not that, you know, more than it was, he knew what he was going to say, and we drafted, right? We basically said, okay, we'll go out there and support you. in what you're doing will help take these people that are supporting you and make sure that we're signing them up. But it was his message and his momentum that carried us.
You, in a sense, were dropped right into the middle of a war because, of course, the left deeply repudiated Trump having won. And you ultimately wrote a book about it called The Briefing. I mean, that must have been just an extraordinary immersion in things that almost nobody's ever gotten to do.
The good part of it was this. I spent over 25 years in the Navy. I've worked in government before, both on Capitol Hill and, as I mentioned, in the Bush administration. I've seen bureaucracy up close. Let's put it that way. With Trump, if you came to him with an idea and you said, Mr. President, or at that, Mr. Trump during the campaign, Mr. President afterwards, here's what I want to do and why. And he would go, great, go do it. There was no memos and PowerPoint presentations. You were given the authority to execute things. That was a good thing. There's also times when it was a bad thing, but for the most part, it was very helpful to cut through that because we were able to do things in a way that normally would have gotten lost in a bureaucratic shuffle. But to see that up close was something that I had never thought. I told people, when you're at the RNC, it's like you're on the JV team. You get the jersey, you're part of the big team, you get invited to the end of the year party, but you're not the starter. And so I always joke that, during the previous cycle, if Romney had won, I probably would have been the Deputy Undersecretary for Public Affairs at HUD, which I'm sure is a very good job. But, we would have gotten something. We would have been taken care of. But having the opportunity to be up close and see this in a way that normally wouldn't have been part of the trajectory of that job was just something fascinating for me. And it was great because there's an old saying by a Marine Corps commandant by the name of Charles Krulak, and he says, in the absence of leadership, take charge. And what the Trump campaign, and frankly, Trump overall, really empowers you to do is if you're seeing something that needs to get done, then go do it. Don't sit around and, ask 18 people, put a plan together and execute it. And I think that was, from a campaign perspective, just so unique. And I don't know that it's going to happen again because I think Trump knows better now. He still has the same mentality, but there's more of a professionalization now with the current campaign structure, which, by the way, I do think there's a balance and it's a good thing.
I think if he can have professionalization without bureaucracy,
yep,
he will be even more powerful and more capable of getting things done. And so far, I would say that Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita are running a textbook operation which people will study for a long time.
Yeah, I keep telling people it's like Goldilocks. Like 2016, the porridge was too cold. 2020, the porridge was too hot. This time it's just right. And I think they've gotten that balance. You've got to understand that Trump is not a typical candidate. He's going to say what he wants to say first, and then you follow up. And they understand him as a candidate and as a person and are able to supplement what he's doing. And that's the unique part about this, to your point. You can't replicate what Trump's doing. There's no one that's going to come after him and say, okay, give me the Trump campaign. It's driven by him first and foremost.
The reason I decided to write a piece on Trump's triumph is here's a guy who's been battered, attacked, assaulted, derided, lied about. And the result is, I'm just going to read the numbers quickly, but to give our listeners a flavor. Alaska, 87%. Alabama, 83%. Arkansas, 77%. California, 78%. Colorado, 63%. Massachusetts, 59.9%. Maine, 72%. When you go down this list of states, this is all in one day and represents a total dominance unlike any non-incumbent I can remember except Andrew Jackson in 1828. It's astonishing to see somebody who that totally dominates the entire national party to a point where nobody else can seriously compete with him.
Well, so here's the other piece of that just so that listeners understand this. Of the 16 contests that were held on the Republican side, 10, well, let me back up a second. The RNC rules dictate that prior to March 15th, all states must be proportional. The idea was that they didn't want a runaway candidate, somebody who had massive national ID or a self-funder to come in and run away with the process. They wanted more voters to be part of the process. So they said, if you're going to go before March 15th, you've got to be proportional. So what the Trump team did last year, while DeSantis was still deciding whether to get in, whether Nikki Haley was still deciding to get in, They went and sat down with these state parties and said, we're going to work within the rules. We're going to make sure that you're proportional technically, but we want to add a caveat to all of your plans that says if you hit over 50%, you get all of the at-large delegates. And the same would be true with the congressional delegates that would be awarded from your state. So he goes in and wins these states by 50+1. California yesterday, 169 delegates. Texas, 161 delegates. He walks out of the state with all of them. It's the professionalization of what they did actually is so important. It's not just the percentages that you're reading out, which are huge. It's the amount of delegates that he walked out of there with. Look at Nikki Haley, and she gets anywhere from 25 to 30, whatever, even 40%. He walked out of the 854 delegates with probably 790 something. He totally dominated. It's interesting today. She drops out. And I was trying to tell people early this morning, this is the equivalent of saying, I quit after someone says you're fired. Her dropping out was irrelevant. It was over.
She would have been better off psychologically to have dropped out after South Carolina. To have said, look, I ran all the way. I was governor. He's clearly more popular. She had a fair amount of money coming from anti-Trump people. The only state she carried was Vermont, which allows Democrats to vote in the Republican primary. And she still only carried it by, I think, 4%. She also won D.C., which I thought was perfectly appropriate. A very weak Republican Party, almost no votes. And all the lobbyists who Trump was going to try to make unemployed decided they'd vote against him.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Look at the media narrative this morning was, well, Trump's got to figure out how to attract the Nikki Haley voters. NBC News did a poll, an exit poll. 41% of Nikki Haley support was from independents. 25% was from Democrats. Those people were never going to vote for Trump. They were people that didn't know there wasn't a contest on the Democratic side and said, fine, I'll go vote for Nikki Haley just because I get to. The other interesting stat that NBC News came out with is they asked people who had voted for Trump in 2020 if they were still voting for him. 97% said yes. They asked the same question of people who voted for Biden in 2020. 85% said yes. Biden has the problem with maintaining his coalition, not Trump. And again, the media narrative is what's Trump going to do to get the Nikki Haley supporters? And my answer is the Nikki Haley supporters, by and large, were Biden voters that just didn't have anything better to do Tuesday.
The chief analyst for the New York Times, Nate Cohen, did a piece and said the fact is Trump is ahead. He's likely to stay ahead. And the number one reason is people don't like Joe Biden. Now, to have a New York Times analyst write that, I thought it was, first of all, an act of great courage, but also tells you how bad Biden is doing, that he's really, truly losing his base in the news media.
Well, I think that the problem that I've tried to figure this out, and my only answer to this is that some of these reporters need to, at some point, have to want to save face, right? They've been carrying the Biden water now for 3 years, and poll after poll shows that it's not working, and that they have to at least at some point say, well, see, I said that he was in trouble, so that when he loses, they can say, see, I called this. But they're not doing this happily. They are begrudgingly coming to the realization that after all the water that they've carried for him for 3 years, it's just not there. And the thing is that you know from all of your time in this game is that at some point, the problem that Biden has between his mental acuity, his physical frailness, and just his unlikability is that those can't be fixed. Those aren't policy prescriptions. You can't say, we'll just, add some more stimulus to the economy and get things going. Those are personal things. Unless he's Benjamin Button, he's not going to get younger.
And I think he has this dual problem that when you ask people, were you better off personally, they overwhelmingly pick the Trump years over the Biden years. And so he has a policy performance problem and a personality performance problem. The two combined is pretty tough.
It's funny. Biden did this interview, I think it was with David Muir, probably 6-7 months ago. And he said, you can't turn on the TV and hear about anything that's going right. Even he admitted it. And it's true. Think about it. Trump's speech last night when he got on stage at Mar-a-Lago, he talked about the economy unemployment rates under him, interest rates, the border, energy independence. The contrast is so sharp. It's not one or two issues. It's not fighting over statistics from the Bureau of Labor Management or something like that and saying, if you look at this, it's literally issue after issue after issue. Here's my record. Here's yours. Which one do you like better? And I think that people are going to have a choice unlike ever before. This is not a hypothetical race where you say, my policies will grow the economy and this thing, and I will continue. It's, hey, here's what I did. Here's my record of results for 4 years. Here's Joe Biden's record of results for 4 years. Which one do you like better? This is sort of like the old school, Diet Pepsi, Diet Coke challenge that they used to do, where sip both, tell me which one you like better. But at some point, you just can't you can't hide it anymore. That's what it is. People are going to choose the Trump record over and over again.
I have to say, just as a brief aside, one of the most interesting minor things yesterday was that Jason Palmer, who's an entrepreneur, won Samoa. But what I love about it is that the territory gets 6 delegates and that he got 51 votes and Biden got 40. But he now has won, I think, the only place that Biden has lost. I just thought it's something basically American, that you can have these little anomalies. And this guy goes out. I mean, apparently American Samoa likes to vote for outliers. They voted for Bloomberg last time. It was humor in the middle of an otherwise very serious process.
It is funny. I mean, the thing is with Bloomberg, though, he actually campaigned there. He spent money in American Samoa to get those delegates, which I get. It makes sense. If you're running in a contested primary, go get them. But this is a dude who lives in Maryland. This isn't like some Samoan that was the local favorite. The guy lives in Maryland. And by the way, Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson were both on the ballot, like who have at least are officially running and people knew about him. I mean, think about that. This guy out of nowhere. No one knew his name yesterday. I don't think anyone knew his name this morning. They were probably still Googling it. But it's an embarrassment. And look, a bigger problem is when you look at the Minnesota uncommitted vote and the vote in North Carolina, where they got to basically vote none of the above, both swing states, that's a problem for Joe Biden. People are going out of their way. And I always tell people, stop for a moment and think about it. Like, I live, I don't know, a quarter of a mile for my voting, the school that's down where I vote. But it still takes, 10 minutes to walk down there. You got to go in, show your ID because it's Virginia. And then you walk out. But my point is, it's a 30-minute in and out kind of deal. If you're going to spend 30 minutes to go vote for Jason, whatever, what's his name? I mean, you have to think about how much you dislike the president of the United States if you're a Democrat, that you're taking 30 minutes out of your day to go cast this vote.
It's Jason Palmer. On the other hand, since the total primary was 91 people, it may not have taken very long.
That's true. But you still got to leave your house and go somewhere. I think that it speaks volumes.
You probably had time for the luau after the vote.
That's right. That's right.
One of the things I'm intrigued with that also broke yesterday, I want to get your reaction to, in a very tight Senate where the bias of who's up for re-election this year strongly favors Republicans, Kyrsten Sinema decided she would not run for re-election. Is sort of the last independent Democrat in the Senate. What do you make of that? And do you think it makes it easier or harder for the Republicans to win Arizona?
Well, let me say a couple things. Number one, the reason the filibuster still exists right now is because of Kyrsten Sinema, right? And her party forced her out. She left the Democratic Party and became independent because they put so much pressure on her and made it so difficult for her. She's from a probably not as ruby red as it used to be, but it's not purple yet, but it's getting there. And instead of embracing her and saying, okay, she's a key vote that gives us the majority, they pushed her out. The media loves to fixate on the problems in the Republican Party. It speaks volumes about the Democratic Party that they wanted her out. Number one. Number two, like I said, I think it's important to give her credit for standing firm on the importance of the filibuster. Lastly, to your question about where does this thing, I think it made it easier for Kari Lake, who will be the Republican nominee, to win with her in the race. She was a Democrat. She served in the House prior to the Senate. So even if she took 5, 10, 20, 40,000 votes, that probably helped Kari Lake. It's going to be more of a dogfight now. Luckily, Ruben Guerrero is an extremely far left Democrat but it's going to cost money, some real money in Arizona. Trump will obviously play there as a battleground state, so that helps get out the vote. But this is going to cost a lot more money now, I think.
Kari Lake has managed to maintain sort of her national attraction through the governor's race, which she lost in a very controversial way. And now, ever since then, she's managed to stay remarkably public, and she's very, very close to Trump. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how that particular race comes out. The one other thing that's sort of an anomaly this year, which I'd like to get your reaction to before I dive in, is the whole effort of the no labels people. What is your sense of that?
So probably the biggest question that I get, and I'm almost certain that if it's not the number one that you get, it's probably in the top three, is tell me who's going to win the presidential race. My answer is tell me how many third-party candidates are on the ballot this November. If you go back and look, for example, at 2016, Michigan, which has 15 electoral votes, was won by Trump by 10,703 votes, 0.22% overall. That was the margin of victory there. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, took 55,000 votes, okay? In 2020, Trump lost Michigan. The Green Party candidate, who I don't know who it was then, got 1,000 votes. How the third-party candidates get on the ballot is going to matter. So no labels right now says they're on 16 ballots. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. yesterday says that he's now on the Nevada ballot. He was on the Utah ballot. He says he's on probably Arizona, potentially one other one. If you're on the ballot in battleground states, of which there are 8, that's it. There are only 8 states that, in my opinion, will determine this election. Then that's going to have a big shift. I mean, look at Arizona and Georgia. We're talking 10,000, 15,000 votes that decided those states. So there's no question in my mind. That's how the race goes. Specifically with no labels, they're going to decide this Friday at their virtual convention whether they're going to run a race. I'm torn on this. I'll defer to you because they've raised all this money. They've really spent a ton of time on ballot access. But they've had a lot of the high-profile people turn them down that said that they didn't want to be the standard bearer. If No Labels runs a candidate and they run the Republican as the president and the Democrat as the vice presidential candidate, and it's somebody of stature, so I'm thinking like a John Huntsman of Utah, somebody who people can look at and say, okay, that's a legitimate candidate, I think it's trouble for Trump. But I think if they run a weak candidate or they put the Democrat at the top, then it's great. I also question their motives, and it's the last thing I'll say on this, because they keep saying, we don't want to put a candidate forward if it helps Trump. Well, that defeats the whole purpose of No Labels was to say we want to find a unifying candidate. Now it's turned into, if it's going to help Trump, we don't want to do anything. And I get it. I'm like, well, that's not what you were told everyone you were all about.
See, I think it's very funny that you have no labels except anti-Trump.
Right. It's one label.
I'm just very dubious about the whole thing. I think the most formidable third-party candidate is Robert Kennedy Jr., because I think he has a genuine personality. He has a national name. He has a pretty intense following on issues, including, the whole vaccination issue. He's only on 4 states. I always thought if the no labels people were clever, they would swallow their pride and accept Kennedy as their candidate. And that would put him on enough states that he would be very formidable. That, however, would truly hurt Biden.
I think at the end of the day, the Kennedy name, enough Democrats would vote for him who are not happy with Biden. It'd give him a place to park their vote. But that's why I'm saying how this plays out matters. How many ballots does he get on? How many ballots and does No Labels put a candidate forward? How does Jill Stein, who is now running again, by the way? All of that to me is pretty important to tell you who's going to win. If they're on the ballot in California and Texas or whatever, who cares? But if they're on the ballot in Pennsylvania and Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, that's going to make a difference. And Kennedy says he's on the ballot in Nevada. That's a big deal. That's potentially enough electoral votes to make a difference.
One of the things somebody said today was that they thought that the Fani Willis case has turned out to be so absurd and so indefensible that they think it has actually put Georgia out of reach for the Democrats. That people are just going to say this is crazy.
It is amazing. You know, when you watch a show or you read a book or whatever it is, and the author or the director just goes too far that you went from enjoying it to be like, okay, you just ruined it. The Democrats did this. Each one of these cases, they took it just a step too far in each case where even Trump haters said, okay, guys, that was too much. Like, you can't do that. And the idea that she's paying her boyfriend to prosecute, I think people are like, oh, guys, you got us. You had us for a little while, but then you did this. Come on.
Well, and I think the next phase is going to be, they are going to try to take Trump to court during the campaign.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that they really don't think through the precedent they're setting in a way that could come back to bite them pretty badly.
No, I'm glad you said that because it's interesting to me. So Trump in this other case, January 6th, and even to some degree in the Mar-a-Lago case, is making an immunity claim. And I've had this conversation with Democrats, and I'll say, you guys realize right now the president of the United States has no immunity, right? So you could theoretically sue Joe Biden for the failed Afghanistan withdrawal. You could sue Barack Obama if you had standing for drone strikes that killed Americans. And they were like, oh, that's silly. Well, no, that's the issue. If the president of the United States doesn't have immunity, now the question is, was Trump acting in his capacity as president of the United States? But when they say, oh, they should throw it out, I'm like, you do realize you do that. You're opening the door to say then the president has no immunity, full stop. And now you can start suing him for adverse actions. Maybe somebody was killed by an illegal alien that was let in or whatever. And they don't ever think about the consequences of what they're doing. It is all in an effort to get Trump at any cost. It doesn't matter the precedent they set, the bridges they burn, the buildings they tear down. It's who cares.
I always tell people it's not that these people can't play chess. They can't play tic-tac-toe.
But here's the thing that I find fascinating. They don't care, right? You talk to them and it's like you say you realize the precedent they'll set. And they're like, well, we have to stop Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're willing to burn down everything just to stop this guy. Yep.
Which means I think we need to be braced for a very interesting period when he wins.
Well, you've already seen what Adam Schiff and Swalwell talk about the fact that the Supreme Court 9-0 said you can't take him off the ballot. So what did they do? They said, well, we're going to introduce legislation that allows us to take him off once he's in office and therefore declare him an insurrectionist and say, fine, you guys said that Section 5 needs to get clarified in terms of Congress doing its job, then we'll do it. And I've said this over and over again on my podcast every single day. Remember, we are 2 votes short of them being able to execute all of this. If the Republicans lose the House majority, it's all going to happen. And people have to understand that if we don't maintain a Republican majority in hopefully both houses, but at least one, we're screwed.
They will use all the force of the law basically to destroy freedom. I mean, it's astonishing. I would never have predicted this, both in my political career and in my profession as a historian. This is all a level of decay beyond anything I could have imagined.
The thing that's amazing, we went back prior to starting, you and I were talking about this, 320,000 people that were flown into this country in secret. I still can't get my head around the fact that that's not a massive scandal. Like, what is going on? I mean, this is every single day something happens. I go back and forth between saying to myself, maybe we should just accept the craziness as this is what's going to happen. But I can't believe that we are going down the paths that we are going down. To your point, thinking to myself, 5 years ago, I would have told you were nuts if you brought up a third of what is happening now. You're going to kick someone off a ballot. We're going to fly in 320,000 people. I grew up in Rhode Island. We have just under 1 million people, depending on the year. That's a third of the state flying in to make sure that Biden can have more voters, which is what it's really all about. And I just keep saying to myself, like, this is insane. How are we not outraged by these tactics? But every day they chip away, chip away, chip away.
Somebody could actually do a book just entitled Scandals. Every chapter would be different and every chapter would be appalling and you couldn't quite believe it. We live in remarkable times.
This is the problem. I think we're getting numb to like, oh, that was Tuesday. What's Wednesday? since the State of the Union is this week, I remember watching Speaker Pelosi stand there and tear up President Trump's State of the Union address, standing at the rostrum, thinking to myself, there's no way that this is happening, that the Speaker of the House is tearing up the State of the Union address. And she was applauded by the folks in the media for taking a tough stand. And I'm like, what is going on?
Well, and it was a clever decision on her part to guarantee that nobody would be talking about his speech. They would be talking about what she did. It was cynical and ruthless, but it was also pretty effective. Listen, Sean, I want to thank you for joining me. I want to remind our listeners they can find your podcast, The Sean Spicer Show, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And they can find out everything you're doing these days on your website at seanspicer.com. And I really appreciate you joining me to talk about Super Tuesday and where we're at right now.
Always an honor to be with you. I wouldn't be where I am in politics, for good or bad, without you and all the ground that you laid with all the things that you and your team, Joe Gaylord, Tony Blankley, countless folks that I looked up to as I started up that ladder. So thank you for everything that you've done for the movement, because that's what it was. The Republican Contract with America got so many people excited and involved. And I think there's a reason that people keep asking you, can we do another one? Because it was that consequential. So thank you for being a friend and a mentor and a leader of a movement that changed this country.
Thank you to my guest, Sean Spicer. You can learn more about Super Tuesday results on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcast and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.